Alright, I'm back. As the century closed and millennial fever mounted, I decided to adopt a new dimension to my personal regimen of the study of demography. Every 1,000 years, I vowed I would look with fresh eyes at a new edition of my favorite book, the UN's Biennial World Population Prospects. To the uninitiated, it is a huge scramble of numbers. For demographers and for demographic hanger-ons like me, it is the bedrock of the field, um, containing an array of data from the 192 largest nations and areas, those with populations of over 100,000 people. Based on the data, it represents 4 different population projections for each nation: high, medium, low, and constant fertility variant. In early 2001, when I scanned the new 2000 edition, I was wide-eyed. There was no plain vanilla birther, the bottom had fallen out. First, the already low European and Japanese rates were sinking with dizzying speed. The 1.8 children per woman of 1980s were projected at 1.3 children per woman in 2000 to 2005 via time frame. That's now. Repeat from 1.8 to 1.3 in a single generation. That 1.3 European rate is 38% below the replacement level. That level is unheard of, previously unimaginable. No serious demographer would plausibly have predicted such a sharp decline over a decade earlier. But most Europeans seem to yawn at this news. After all, for decades, the bedrock UN demographic projections have been stating that over the course of the next half-century or so, the European and Japanese TFRs would likely drift back upward to the 1.1 replacement level. This projection was based on absolutely no evidence, nor would a projected population rebound likely come from a massive immigration. By American standards, the European countries had taken in only moderate numbers of immigrants, mostly Muslims, and for the most part typically abhorred what they had done, or what had been done to them. World Population Prospects is available for $80 at the UN bookstore at UN headquarters in New York City. The price is steep, but nearly all the findings are available free of charge on the internet at unpopulation.org. A CD-ROM is available for $800. Poor nations get one free. Okay. The principal rationale of the UN Population Division seems to be, quote, these kinds of lows and lower rates in Europe can't continue or these countries will go out of business. The UN demographic record keepers treated the Japanese in roughly the same manners. That is, they projected the resurgence from 1.3 to about 2.1 children per woman by the mid-21st century, and the Japanese, despite immigrants probably even more so than do Europeans. The second eye-opener from the World Population Prospects was that a major abnormality seemed to be taking shape. With the fertility rate in the modern nations while the fertility rates fell sharper in modern nations, the United States had rate moved up. Not quite to the replacement level, but up. How long it will stay up remains to be seen, and we should be careful in thinking about it. But for now, America is quite clearly the most baby-making of the world's major modern nations. Moreover, Americans take in a solid number of immigrants, higher by far than do the Europeans or Japanese. One estimate has it that America takes in as many legal immigrants as the entire rest of the world together. Thus, the United States, principally because of immigration, was growing steadily and would continue to do so. The UN medium variant projection called for about 400 million Americans by the year 2050, up from 283 million in 2000. The first U.S. census, taken in 1790, showed 3.9 million people. As I saw it, through much-worn magenta lenses, this was yet further evidence that America should be seen as the world's most exceptional nation, with much of human destiny resting on its shoulders. Yeah, okay. So you see the fear-mongering slowly rising through this book. It doesn't immediately seem as mask off as the birth earth, but when he says 1790s, he's referring to the first census when it was mostly white people in America. So I think it's a little bit of a dog whistle, but he's mostly talking about the data, which unfortunately seems to be biased towards white people saving the species or whatever nonsense. Alright. And even that wasn't the biggest part of the story. Another potent trend apparent in the 2000 volume was becoming ever more evident. Many people interested in public affairs have an accurate notion about low fertility rates, though they may have a small sense of recent magnitude of Euro-Japanese decline. One of the most recent demographic trends in motion in the non-modern nations, those that used to be called Third World, there is almost total ignorance. Most anyone tell you that population is exploding in these places. Indeed, I had dealt with this in the birth earth, but in the context of the upside, not the downside. The TFR for all the less developed countries had dropped from 6 children in the first half of the 1960s to about 4 children in the early 1990s. That's a big drop. It was encouraging. I duly noted it would continue downward, but 4 children per woman is still far above replacement level and would yield nothing but substantially more population than those poorer countries for a long time. This was the powerful message stressed at various points on the political spectrum. Notwithstanding very low fertility in the modern nations, notwithstanding forthcoming European and Japanese depopulation, the total world population would grow substantially for several decades, gobbling up resources, polluting the planet, warming the climate, forcing unwanted immigration on the modern nations, and always lurking in the background, changing the balance of power while altering patterns of race, culture, and ethnicity in the world. Oh, see, there's the dog whistle, I guess. It just didn't seem... Yeah, okay. Okay. It was implied that the human species would run out of control, that the world might even find many species disappearing as rapacious human beings built ever more fast food joints in the middle of the rainforest. In truth, there was some real merit in what environmentalists had to say, along with the heavy dose of demagoguery during this remarkable run of population growth. Quadrupling of global population in a single century was something to write about home. But so dramatic was the new data from the late 1980s and the 1990s that what was happening in the late developed countries now had to be seen in different ways. It was very much a part of the forthcoming depopulation process rather than an exception to it. As shown in the early chart, the TFR for the less developed countries had fallen to 2.9 children per woman. From a high of 6 children in the late 1960s, a drop of more than 3 children per woman. The rate had dropped by 52%, but that's misleading. More important, it had dropped about 85% of the way towards replacement level fertility. The end of worldwide population growth was thus clearly in sight, albeit through mid-range lenses, and not one person in the 1,000, if that, had a clue about it. It was pretty clear to me and many demographers that the number of children per woman would keep on falling rapidly, for reasons I will explain. Then, quite possibly, before mid-century, total world population itself would then begin to fall. Who could envision a world where India, Bangladesh, Brazil, Mexico, and Muslim countries, and even poorer sub-Saharan African countries would lose populations from natural decline? You can also find sources that say India is just overpopulated, but I guess to the standards that demographers want, it's not enough, so it's very weird. These people see the human species growing, and they're like, oh my god, collapse! Alright, well, anyways. Then in March 2002, after After publication of the UN's 2000 revisions volume, but before publication of its 2002 volume, which appeared in early 2003, the UN officially revised its thinking on very important matter. Its scholarly population division announced that new and different projections were on the way, whose implications would be nothing less than momentous. This is not the way scholars normally talk to one another. It was high praise of oneself from oneself, and in this case, it was fully merited. I date the advent of the new demography from that moment. After decades of dilly-dallying, the UN population bit the bullet. Finally, the world's official sources showed its medium projection that the less developed countries would emerge and the more developed nations and fall below the replacement level. Then, according to UN, world populations would decline in the latter part of the 21st century. Yes, decline in this century. I think it would happen sooner, within 3 to 4 decades, perhaps a bit longer. I will offer reasons. I was invited to be a participant in a UN conference of demography to discuss the matter. As I had been once before, I was amazed by what I heard. As the lights blinked in the simultaneous translation booths and demographers seated around the long oval tables sipped their coffee, a bare-bones story took on meat. Demographers from the Iran reported that TFR, in his official less developed country, a despotic Islamic theocracy, a charter member of the Axis of Evil, had fallen to 2.06 children per woman. That is, below the replacement level. A demographer from Brazil spoke in Spanish because there were no Portuguese interpreters available. She said that Brazil was already likely below replacement level and that the UN hadn't quite caught up with reality. And then another shocker, the Mexican demographer said that her country would fall below the replacement level by 2005. If so, what about the tan tide of humanity surging up across the Rio Grande that had so traumatized Pat Buchanan and many other Americans? In years to come, if Mexico fell below the replacement level and Mexicans, legal and illegal, continue coming into America, wouldn't Mexico empty out? And that wasn't all. Suddenly, most all the other demographic shibboleths were under question. Stone-faced, the professional social scientist noted that something more than the correlations of the past was underway. The old ones had seen the relationship between the education of women and low fertility, between numbers of working women and low fertility, between government family planning programs and low fertility. Now something new was happening. Among me at the table were experts who had been caught with their correlations down, acknowledging that the roots of their discipline were planted in wet sand. They knew what was happening, but they did not know why. I'll be back.